Nafisa, how are we? Okay, so what we're looking at here, as always, if you are in the chat, they will be posted onto the platform after, along with the recording. But if you are just joining, cash flow business, or sorry, budgeting and cash flow notes there at the top of the chat. If you click on that link, it should bring you and give you the PDF of what we are going through here. And I'm just making sure my mic is okay. Yeah, all good to go. Okay, so now obviously we're week 3 so far of our business kind of blitz. Now what we've been focusing on, last week we looked at marketing. All we're focusing on for this 5 week blitz is topical common topics. So I often get a few questions in the chat. Obviously, if we can keep it to the topic that we're doing at the minute, at the end, if I have time, if I've gone through the questions at the end, I will go through. If you do have any questions about any other things like predictions and so on, which seems to be the common theme, I'll answer them at the end, or else I'll stick around. I know it cuts off the stream at 8, but I will stick around in the live chat, and you can throw. I'll stick around for a couple of minutes so you can throw a few questions. I get the odd question about predictions and so on. So I'll probably release something in the coming weeks about predictions, about kind of what topics to hone in on and stuff. But what we're doing in this 5 week blitz is very relevant for what you're going to see in June, particularly this topic, and particularly the next 2 weeks. Now we're going to be looking at our question 17. We're going to hone in on both of them. Now I know income statements and final accounts is more than likely going to be the question 17, but we'll have a look at double entry and make sure there's no surprises there, that we're all okay. And then week 5, we'll have a look at final accounts. Okay, so what we're looking at now I would have done, some of you may have joined me for that. I think it was around Christmas time actually. We would have done a masterclass, or I would have done a masterclass on household budgeting. Okay, what I'm going to do now is, just so we're covered in both aspects, I'm going to introduce or kind of touch on business cash flow. Essentially what the business cash flow is essentially, it's the business's budget. That's the way I kind of want you to look at it. So the way we calculate our net cash, opening cash, closing cash, which we're going to hone in on, we're going to make sure that everyone's absolutely spot on with that, how to do that, is the same. The only subtle difference is in a household budget you have income and then you have expenditure, whereas for a cash flow you have receipts and then you have payments. So money in for both, just subtle different terms. And how they're asked is usually the same, that you'll have to fill in. You'll be given bits of information like different costs, different expenditure, different payments, different receipts and so on, and you'll just have to fill it in. And we'll go through a full question. We'll probably go through a full cash flow question, but we're going to go through all of the net cash, the opening cash and closing cash questions that have come up, because sometimes they can come up in a short question, just calculating those. So we're going to make sure we're absolutely spot on with that. Okay, so for this session, because when we're doing these kind of calculations questions, they take a small bit more time. So I'm going to kind of look at I'm going to skim through kind of the notes section. These notes they're for your reading. There is a few sample answers here. So like at the very start, these 3 kind of points here, just number 1, 2, and 3 there. This is kind of what way they ask your question. So budgeting and business cash flows, very common question asked on the course. And what they'll ask is, you'll have to prepare and analyze, which is just filling it in with the figures you're given, determine the financial position. And that just simply means, do they have a surplus of money or a deficit? And then part 3 is appropriate action. And usually it's like a case of, how would you deal with the deficit? Because that's kind of, if you're in a surplus, you're doing all right. You've got more money than you're spending. And that goes for a household, and that goes for a business as well. All right, so those are the 3 kind of questions that they'll ask you. They could very well be a question 18, a question 16, a longer question where you'll have to do a full budget. You'll get your answer. Is it a surplus? Is it a deficit? What kind of what action should the business take? Usually it's kind of like spreading out their spending, maybe spend less on discretionary if you're a household and so on. And they're the type of questions that you'll more than likely see. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time in terms of the nitty gritty of the notes, but what I will say is there is sample answers, kind of two and three in particular, what we're looking at here. So what should a household do if it has a budget surplus? And then what would they do if they have a budget deficit? Okay, and then I think I also go down and do I link in, kind of, I think I split them, did I? So there's your sample question, and then I move and I do the exact same for kind of cash flow and consequences of cash flow problems there as well. Okay, so what I'm going to spend a touch of time on, and then we're going to jump into it, because really all these budget, all the accounting questions that you'll come up across in business, it's all about practicing them. Now, we've got a good few sample questions there for you, but even if you're opening up your papers and you jump and you quit, it's all about practicing them. Even if you go to your textbook, some of your textbooks have like your skills books, all about practice. The more practice you get, it's all about repetition. The process of these never changes. Subtle different things in terms of maybe different expenses, different costs change, but other than that, it's the same kind of process, the same things you have to remember each time, and all that helps with that is repetition. Okay, so I've kind of split it here. I've got the first part of the notes are kind of talking about budgets and cash flow. I've kind of mixed them, but I also do have a kind of a general cash flow section kind of halfway down through there. Okay, so why do you prepare it? Basically, you just want to see, you don't want to make sure that you don't spend. Are we going to go over national budgets? Manu, there's going to be some on-demand content coming for them. I know that you're talking about the current income and current expenditure for the government. There is going to be some on-demand content, so keep an eye on the platform for that. Okay, whereas this one we're kind of focused on the household and the cash flows. All right, so live within their means. That's kind of what we're looking at here. We don't want to spend more than we earn. Because like if you're a household, that's not feasible. You may go into debt. You may have to take out loans. You may run yourself into financial issues. And then if you're a business, if you run into cash flow problems in terms of you're spending more than you're earning, you're not going to survive in the long term. So it's not really great. Okay, so just if I was to jot down a little note for you here. So I've got my questions up here. I've got 1, 2, and 3. We're going to look at preparing and analyzing, linking in with your 2. These are kind of your sample answers. To question 3 up there. So recommending course of action. And what will happen is you'll calculate your budget. Hopefully you'll get it spot on. The 2 figures at the end are balancing. And usually you'll be able to know if it's a plus figure, it's a surplus. If it's a minus figure, then it's a deficit. Chances are it's going to be a surplus. All right. What can you do? What can the business do? What can the family do? They're the kind of questions. Recommend a course of action for the family. Recommend a course of action for the business. Right. Surplus, you have more money. So more money in, so more income, or you have more receipts, then expenditure, or then payments. And it's the same kind of exact same for cash flow. More money, so more receipts, then payments. Whereas deficit, you have less receipts or less income than your expenditure, which is always a bad thing. Okay, and there's simple solutions. This would be the one I'd be focusing on if you were recommend. Hallie, can you say do avoid debt? Are you saying for recommend a course of action? So for Hallie, so you'd have to go a step further with that, Hallie. You'd have to probably say, so obviously you're avoiding debt, but how do you avoid the debt? So you probably have to discuss, you may have to, usually when you're running a deficit, you just have to spend less. So you'd have to go through, so to avoid debt, you'd have to go through your expenses or your payments, and you just have to reduce them. So you would say if there's a big amount for say electricity costs or something along those lines in your cash flow, you would recommend saying that they can reduce the amount of electricity they use, or they could change provider or something along those lines, which will reduce their costs, which will reduce their deficit. Again, similar here. So you can either, for a household, you can increase your income, so you can get 2 jobs, make changes to your expenditure by spending less basically, and then avail of borrowing. That's a popular one. So if you're in a deficit, you can avail of a short-term, medium-term or long-term loan. But again, you're just recommending a course of action. How do you deal with the deficit? Those are your kind of 3 ways, and you can discuss it in the form of a budget for a household, or you can discuss it in the form of in the eyes of a business. So you're talking about your cash flow there. All right, and then you just, while it's unlikely but surplus, recommend a course of action. You can save it for emergencies in terms of a household or a budget. If you've taken out a loan, you can use the surplus to repay it, and then you can actually spend more, maybe invest in certain things, maybe invest in more machinery, invest in things like that, particularly for a business, whatnot. Maybe you can put it towards a holiday if you were a household. But again, what should a household do? What should an organization or a business do? These are kind of recommending a course of action. They're your sample answers there. Yeah. And then basically linking, if you run a deficit, basically what you're doing there is you're overspending. So you're just spending more money than you should be, right? Recommend a course of action. Spend less, cut back on spending, postpone it, put it to a different month, spread large payments. So if you have a large payment, you can pay it in 3, you can pay it in 12, you can spread it over time. Use savings or surplus money, generate extra income, whether that's extra, if you're a family, get an extra or a second job, and then you can borrow as well, right? They're kind of things, how do you solve your deficit? Basically, when you're running a deficit, whether you're a family, whether you're a business, you are spending too much, right? Your costs are too high, or you're spending too much, your expenditure is too high. So you just have to reduce that. How do you do that? Spend less. So reduce your groceries, reduce your electricity usage, spread it out, spread your longer term payments over months rather than one lump sum. So again, you're able to kind of budget it in that way, and so on. But that's where your question 3 there, you're recommending a course of action, particularly around what the business can do. Mainly what you're going to be talking about is overspending, and how can the household or how can the business reduce that spending. And that's kind of where your question 3 comes from. Okay, and going back, we're just going to touch on, we're going to spend a bit of time on the net cash. We're going to be doing a large question now in a second, so I'm going to jump in. But this is, again, if you've hopefully you'll have seen these, you'll have been practicing these. Chances are you would have done them in first year-ish. Hopefully you would have had a bit of time to revise them as well. But this is what you're going to see. All right, so this is based on the junior cycle paper in 2024. You'll see the income section at the top, planned income. Usually it can be 3 or 4 months. Now based on we're looking at 3 months here, and then we add them all together and we get our total. So you could have wages, you could have grants, you could have an allowance, and the chances are this will be done for you. So similarly, if you remember, say your income statement, usually the trading account part, finding your gross profit, that's kind of done for you. Similar with your budget, they're not going to have you putting in all the figures, doing up a lot of adding, because again, it's a large paper, it's a large course, there's a lot of content that they'll want to ask you questions on. So they're not going to have you devoting a lot of time just to repeating steps all the time. So where they're going to get you to start inputting figures is usually around your expenditure. All right, so this part here, so your planned expenditure, or your which is your fixed and your irregular and discretionary if you're a household. Okay, so what you'll see here again, this is 2024, classified as fixed, irregular, or discretionary. And as you can see, they would have done, so these little things here, this is kind of a marking scheme. Now we'll try a question now in a second. All these 1 marks, that's how many marks you can get. So as you can see, quite heavily weighted in terms of marks. So 32 marks for the full question. So a large amount of marks. All right, so quite a substantial one here. But what you'll notice here is fixed has been done for you as well. Okay, so fixed is just expenditure that doesn't change, whether how much you use it or not. So rent, you pay rent. You could be in any tips here. Hallie, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to explain. Usually there's one major flaw that people do, why it doesn't balance at the end. So I'll help you out with a little tip there. Okay, once we'll jump into net cash, opening cash now in a second. Okay. So where we're going to jump into it is likelihood is going to be our irregular and then our discretionary. All right, so you're going to have various different figures here. You're going to have plans to spend 200 a month on food, has opening cash. There's various different figures given into it, and we'll show you what I mean by that. Mobile phone costs per month, they'll give you different amounts, so 30 in October, 50 in November, and so on. So irregular expenditure, what that means is it varies, it changes depending on how much you use, right? So you may need, your electricity bill could be higher in 1 month because you used more appliances in that month than the previous, right? So it changes based on use. And then discretionary is kind of your kind of your wants, shall we say, so your holidays, your entertainment, and so on. All right, and how we do all these is we're going to be doing a good bit of adding here. All right, and then at the very end is where we start inputting a bit of subtraction. All right, so we're going to add up our subtotals. We're going to get our total expenditure, and then eventually we're going to get our net cash, opening cash, and closing cash, which is the next step here. Now, Hallie, this is kind of where, if your balance doesn't balance in the end, this might be something that you've forgotten to do. Sometimes it does it for you, and then sometimes it doesn't. So I'm going to I'll jump to a sample question now in a second by what I mean, like a short question. All right, so this is kind of your opening cash here, and the likelihood is, if the opening cash hasn't been given, and it's the same for cash flow as well, I know I'm context of budgets here, but if the question hasn't already included it, you always put the opening cash figure in the first month and the total column. And the reason being is because you have to think about, if we're looking at, say, our opening cash in July, what that means is that's the closing cash from the previous month, the money we're left over with. So that's our closing cash in June, right? So it's technically a balance. So it's not quite an income, it's not quite an expenditure. So that's why you put the opening cash. This is your first rule. This is what I would start your question with if it hasn't already been done for you. Immediately, first thing you do, opening cash, you put it in the first month. So down an opening cash down the bottom, so say July, say October, and then you automatically put it in your total column. That's what students get mixed up with. That's why you don't get the same 2 answers at the end. And that's likely why they don't balance, Hallie, okay? So what I mean by that, and I'll just skip through kind of, and we'll jump to a sample, and then we'll jump into a full question. We might do a cash flow because it's now, right? Here, I think there's actually a smaller one. We'll start with the easier one. Here we go. Okay, now what we can see here is in 2022, we've got our net cash, we've got our opening cash, and we've got our closing cash. All right, what we can see that's already been done for us. So we have our first month here is our opening cash, and then what we see, the same figure is in the total there. All right, so how you would find your net cash is total income. And again, we're going to do a full question, so, or total receipts and so on, minus total expenditure. I'll just write it there. Okay, so we have our net cash. So we've found, so our net cash is simply the balance, the difference between our income, so our money in, minus our money out, right? So what we would have done there in July, to get this figure here, our 150, we would have taken away the totals of our income minus the total expenditure, and we would have got 150 here. So when we're doing our net and opening cash, what is our rule? Okay, so it's income minus expenditure equals net cash. Net cash always plus closing cash, or sorry, plus opening cash. Right? That's our next step. So we'll find our net. So when was the budget has in the paper in form of a long question? It was 2024. And it didn't come up last year, but it's a good, always comes up in a short question as well. Cash flow is 2023, so they're both due to be coming up. Right? So following this rule, so we've done in this question, it's already been done for us, and I'll jump into a cash flow after this. We'll go through it. Right? Total income minus total expenditure. So we've got our net cash for July, which is 150. Then we follow our rule. So it's net cash plus opening cash. So it's going to be 150 plus 210, and I'm going to slow it down here just to make sure we're all with me. So it's going to be 150, again, calculators if you're not sure, 150 plus 210, and we're going to get a figure of 360 euro there. All right, we can see, we know we're right, because when we're doing our cash flow, so again, remember, tip as well, your closing cash for the previous month becomes your opening cash for the next month. So that's why you remember when you're doing your budget, you might bring your arrow or draw an arrow up or something just so you can remember. That's why the 360, it is closing cash in July, moves up to our opening cash in August. So that's what we were left with in July 31st. So the 1st of August, new month, new opening cash. That's what our balance was. That's why we have our 360 here. And then these, whenever you see brackets here, that just means it's a minus figure. All right, so sometimes you'll see in budgets it'll be brackets. So that means it's minus 300. And again, following this formula every time, even if it's a minus figure, you still plus them together. So it's minus 300 plus 360 will give us 60 here. Okay, all okay with that. I'm just going to slow it down here just for a second, and then before we jump into a full question. We're all okay with that, I think. Just want to make sure. Okay, I think don't see any questions, so we're all good. Yeah, okay. So remember, closing cash for the previous month becomes our opening cash for the next month. So minus 300 plus 360 gives us a closing cash of 60 euro. So it's plus, there's no brackets, so it's a plus figure. We bring that up, and that becomes our opening cash for September. Okay, all good with that. Then it's just repeating the steps. So again, anything in our brackets here, so it's minus 150 plus 60, and that's going to give us a minus figure. So again, if you were to use your calculators, if you're not sure, minus 150 plus 60 is going to give us a figure of minus 90. And Hallie, this is where it comes into play. If you didn't have this given to you, and you did you followed other steps, you went a different way, these two should be the same in order for our answer to write when we're doing a full cash flow or budget. All right. So again, same steps for the total column. The only difference is we've got a balance here. We don't have a new income or expenditure. That's why our total column, we always put the opening cash in the total column as well. So it's minus 300 plus 210 will give us a figure of minus 90. Both of these are the same. We have done our question right, and we've got the right answer here. So total income minus total expenditure will give us our net cash. Net cash plus opening cash will give us our closing cash. And that's why, I think it was Hallie, you mentioned it, that's how you get your two answers to balance at the end. So you always, first thing you do, if it's not done for you, hopefully it is done for you in the questions, you don't have to remember it, but if it's not done, your opening cash that they give you in the question, put it in the first month. So in this question would have been July, so this part here, and then you would put it in your total there, which is why you have 210 and 210. Okay, before we jump into kind of a full question, does anybody any questions there just before we move on? Again, hopefully if you haven't been practicing these, hopefully it's kind of starting to come back to you when you're bringing figures up and so on, but I think we're all okay. I don't see any questions, so I can move on. Yeah, okay. So now likelihood is you'll be given a okay, in my mock they required headings which total for 64 marks of the paper, 20%. Would this be something you've seen before? If they required the headings. Now, Michaela, the only thing I could see being that high would be, and if it required headings, I think you may be talking about either your cash books and your ledgers, or your final accounts, which would be your income statement and statement of financial position. That's something that requires headings that you have to fill in, like a state and explain method. Now, I haven't seen anything like that before, particularly like anything like budgets, large questions, heavily marked questions would have been like this. You'll be given the template, and then you can see part 2 here is what advice, give your decision. So 64 marks, I don't think it'll be weighted that heavily, Michaela, if I haven't seen anything like that before. I may have a quick look. I have access to the mock papers. I might have a look and get back to you on that one. So what we're going to do here is now we're going to do a shorter kind of a cash flow, and we're going to really take our time just so we're spot on here. Okay, few things. Now this is where you're kind of what you'll see. So again, we are looking at a business here. So we're not quite talking about a household. So this is a business. So we're looking at Mount Rangers. I think it's GAA Club. So we're looking at a business or an cultural enterprise, you can say. Right. So we're going to be talking about receipts and payments. So again, all we're looking at here is money in, money out. And that's why they're the same process, same steps for a cash flow and a budget. We're money in, we're money out. Just subtle differences in the terms. Okay. So first thing, again, that jumps out at me straight away. Now, it doesn't mention anything in the question about it, but this figure here, there's my opening cash, hasn't been done for me. So I have to put that somewhere. So I'll just zoom in so we can all see it perfectly. Right, that it's in the first month. So Hallie, this is kind of where you get your balance to kind of, this is where you get it to balance at the end. We put it here, but we also put it here, 175. That is how you'll get your balancing at the end. Okay, so opening cash, first month, and then we'll put it in our total column as well. because it's a balance at the end of the day. It's not an income, it's not an expense. Now we can go back. So that's the first thing you would always do in a budget or in a cash flow. Opening cash, first month, and total column. That's your first rule. Absolutely. Have to do it in order to get full marks for the question, or get your balancing right at the end. Now we can just start. Again, we can see our receipts and we can see our grants, we fundraising, and our total receipts. So all of this has been done for us here. So our receipts have been done. So we're going to jump straight in with kind of our our payments, because we're doing a cash flow, right? So our purchases in June, it was 172, July it was 58, and August it was 135, right? So I'm going to fill them in now. So in June, 172, don't need to put the euro sign in because you have it up here. So that means all of these figures just mean 172 euro, 600 euro, and so on. July, 58. August, 135. Now, if you're doing this along with me and you're happy to kind of speed through, absolutely fire ahead. I'm just going to take a bit of time just so we're all okay in going through the steps. But fire away. Any questions, throw them in while you're working through it, and I'll try and get to them. Okay. Now, there is ways you can do it. Now, I'm just looking at my calculator. I have my calculator here in front of me. Okay. You can do it certain ways. You can add them up now. You can do 172, 58, 135, or you could fill them all in and then add them. It's up to you, whatever way works best for you. I'm just going to add them in the way I see it. So it's going to be 172 plus 58 plus 135, and that's going to give me a total of 365. And what I'm going to do there is, all I've done, if you're not sure, I've just added this plus this equals that. Now, you don't have to do that on the exam, but it's just showing you where I got those figures from. So that's purchases done. Then we have new equipment. New equipment, June, 450 euro. If there is only one figure, that means there was no other payments made in July or August. So we can just put a little dash here. That just means there was nothing or no payment made. So new equipment, June, 450 euro. So that means it's going to be 450 euro plus 0 plus 0. So our total, again, is just going to be 450. Okay, all good with that. Don't see any questions, so we're all okay. Good stuff. Next one then. This is where they could throw a few figures at you. Administration costs, we have June, 20 euro, July, 26, and August, we have 18. So we have different figures, so make sure we're filling them in the right month. So June, 20, July, 26, August, we have 18 euro. And I'm going to add those up together. So 20 plus 26 plus 18 is going to give us a figure of 64. And even if you're happy, even if you think you're quite good at maths, always use the calculator here. Don't rush this. Don't rush, because if you get one figure off, it'll affect your balance at the end. So be careful, take your time, make sure we're spot on here. Okay, so I've done my purchases. If you want to do it this way, you can. I've done my equipment and I've done my admin costs. I have nothing else left to fill in terms of payments. So then I can just find what's next. We're looking here, our total payments. So whenever we have a total of something, we're going to be adding them. So total payments just means we have to add them all up. And I'm going to go individually here. I'm going to start here and move my way across. So I'm going to do each month and then I'll do the total after that. So I have 172, and I'm just looking down at the calculator here, plus 450 plus 20 gives me a figure of 642. And all I did there was I added these three and I got 642 there. So hopefully you're all still with me or you're flying ahead. Yeah, we're all good. That's June finished. Moving on to July, 58 plus blank plus 26. So that's just 0. So because there was no expense. So 58 and 26 gives me 84. Or I'll keep it in black. 84 euro. And all I've done there is I've added 58 plus 26 equals 84 there. And you can see it's just about repeating steps and just making sure you're spot on. Similarly for August, 135 plus 18, we get a figure of 153. And then we'll do the same for our totals. 365 plus 450 plus 64 gives us a total of 879. And if you were to want to check that, so I just added up these three and got 879. If I add 642 plus 84 plus 153, I should get the same figure, which I do. So if you add these three up, you'll get 879 as well. So I'm absolutely spot on here. Okay, I'll just remove that for the next step. So this is where a lot of students get that part. Okay, they're good with inputting the figures. They take a bit of time. They've gotten their adding right, and they've got this part spot on. Now, net cash, opening cash, and closing cash is where it kind of causes a few problems. So we have to remember, so we've done our first rule. So we put our opening cash in our first month and we've put it in our total column. So we've set with that. Now, how do we find our net cash? So essentially our net cash is our money in. So I'll write it here, money in minus money out. And the reason I'm saying money in minus money out is because it's the same for budgets and it's the same for cash flows. So in this case, our money in is known as our total receipts. So I'll just highlight the figure here. So I'll highlight it in blue. So it's going to be total receipts, which is our money in. And then I'll do our money out is our total payments. So it's going to be money in minus our money out, which is our total receipts minus our total payments, and that'll give us our net cash. And we're going to again month by month, and then we'll do the total. So it's going to be 400, so I'll highlight them here. 600, 500, and that, minus our pink figures. And they will all give us a figure. They will give us our net cash. And that's the only time you'll minus in your budgets or cash flow. All right, so just to finish it off here. So it's going to be 400 euro, and you're always following the minus figure, even if your money out is a bigger figure. So again, I'm going to open up my calculator, go into June. So it's going to be 400 minus 642. Again, your calculator should tell you that's going to give us a minus figure of 242. So all I've done there is 400 minus 642, and that gives us a net cash figure of minus 242. You can do it in brackets as well if you want to follow, but I always just like putting in minus. And then I'm going to do I would do all your net cash figures first. So I do net cash, then I do June, then I do July, then I do August, then I'd move on, calculate my opening cash and closing cash from that. But always do your net cash first. So moving on to July, it's going to be 600 minus 84. And that's going to give us a figure of 516. Again, plus figure, whatever the calculator's given us. So 600 total receipts minus total payments of 84 gives us a figure of 516. Moving on to August then, 500 minus 153 will give us a figure of 347. And then don't forget your total column just to finish it off. 1,500 minus our total receipts total, 879, equals 621 euro. And I don't see any questions. We're all still with me there. I'll just make sure that we're all okay. Okay, seem to be still with me. Good stuff. Now, that's our second. So we've done our opening cash, we've put it in our first month, and we've put it in our total. We've found our net cash, so it's money in minus our money out, whether that's income minus expenditure or receipts minus payments. Now we have to move on and find our closing cash. And how we do that, always net cash plus opening. Always, every single time. So in this case, once we find our closing cash for June, we can bring it up and it becomes opening cash in July, and then we'd keep going with the question there. So again, minus, so we're going to be net cash plus opening. So I might do a different color. So our net cash here, I'll leave the colors then, just don't confuse people. So it's going to be minus 242 plus 175, and that gives us a figure of minus 67. Would both minus be fine? Yeah, Hallie, that's fine. You wouldn't lose any marks for that. If you want to just do one, that's fine. So do a minus or you do a brackets, absolutely fine, but you wouldn't lose any marks for having minus and brackets in the same one. Okay, so we've done net cash plus opening for June. So our closing cash in June then becomes our opening cash, and you can write your arrow if you want, just so you know what you're doing, becomes your opening cash for July. So your closing cash for the previous month becomes your opening cash for the next month. So it's going to be minus 67 here. Okay, and don't get, because we're always, so net cash plus opening cash, always follow the same way. So it's going to be 516 plus minus 67, right? In the grand scheme of things, that actually means 516 minus 67, but we're plussing a minus figure, so that's where that comes from. So it's 516 plus minus 67, and your calculator should do it for you, hopefully. Will give us a figure of 449. So it's still net cash plus opening cash, but because that's a minus figure, we just change it to the minus sum. So it becomes essentially the sum is 516 minus 67, or 67. Haha. All right, and then our closing cash in July then becomes our opening cash for August. So we bring up that 449, and again, just repeating our steps. For August, 347 plus 449 will give us a figure of 796 for August. And we are hoping we've done the question right. We add our totals, 621 plus 175, and we get the same answer here, 796. And Hallie, you mentioned about the balancing. That's the reason, or that's how you know you've done the question completely right. Your total at the end of the last month, which is August, is the same as your total in your total column. So 796 there. Okay, exact same. That was kind of a shorter, that was 2023. What I'd suggest you do in order to practice, I'll go back to that part 2 because it's a good question to try. I would try that 2024 question now. As you can see, there's a small bit more in it. I probably wouldn't have time to go through the full question, but that's a good one to practice now. As you can see, you've got your income is done for you, as I mentioned. Your planned expenditure is done for you. What you'd have to do is your irregular expenditure, your discretionary, you'd find your total, and then it even gives you a little hint here. Look, net cash equals A, which is just total income, minus B, which is total expenditure. So they might throw in a few hints for you there. It's like that's giving you the formula there. Okay. One thing that would jump out at me, the first rule that you would do, and I'll jump back to the cash flow question now in a second. The first thing you see is she has an opening cash on the 1st of October of €500. So that's going to October, opening cash. Anybody in the chat, where do I put it next? Where do I put that 500 figure? How do I get them to balance? Where do I put it? Are you still with me in the chat? Total. Excellent, Hallie. Well done. So I put the 500 here. All right. Then Nafisa, excellent in the total. Perfect. Then we'd start Manu, spot on in the total. Then we'd start jumping in with putting in our figures. All right. So we'd go back in. Usually they're done in order. Plans to spend 200 a month on groceries and food, electricity, mobile phone, and then entertainment. So what you'll notice is they're not gonna try and catch you out here. They probably won't mix them up. So the likelihood is you'll have your groceries first, your electricity second, and third listed like this. And then 4 for entertainment. So they're not going to try and catch you out like that. But just going back, so that's one question I want you to try in your own time. Again, that's the last time a full long question, 2024. So it wasn't last year. So as you can see, last year's question, all right, outline 2 reasons why they should prepare a budget. Again, so they keep within their means, so they don't run into debt. There's 2 reasons right off the bat. And what you would have had to do there, you would have had to do your net cash, opening cash, and closing cash. So you can see that's why that's really, really important. It's not a case of they don't come up. These 3 really, really important. There'll be a question on that in June. You'll have to either hopefully it's a long question, a really, really nice marked question, or else you'll have to do a short question on net, opening, and closing. Okay. And then just going back, I might actually answer that question now in a sec. Based on your above cash flow budget, what advice, so again, this is going back to our number 3 from the top of the notes, recommend a course of action. What advice would you give to the club regarding their closing cash position in June? All right, so I'm going to highlight that. So I'm looking at closing cash position in June, minus €67. Okay, so what that question is basically asking me is deficit in June. And if we were to look at why there's a big deficit, we have only one big expense, and that's this expense here, new equipment, €450. So one part of advice you could say is, what's the club? Mount Rangers, or Mount Leinster Rangers? No, Mount Rangers. Mount Rangers. What advice regarding should consider spreading out large payments. And then what I would always do, if you have a large payment, include it, e.g. new equipment. So spread out large payments over other months. And there's your answer. So again, going back to all I've done there is recommend a course of action for a deficit. That's why the notes up the top are quite important. All I've done there. Now, sometimes what could happen is you could find Mount Rangers may have had a minus 796 as their total. That means they're running a deficit. That means they're actually having cash flow problems. That's what that term means. So you could recommend a position overall, and you could still use that. You could say reduce spending. So again, any deficit, reduce your spending, or else similarly, if there are being specific months, spread out your large payments or large expenses, such as new equipment, over other months or over future months, and so on. Okay, and just going back up to this question, I actually like this question. So one thing that jumps out straight away, first thing that you do, first rule, opening cash, put it straight into the total. And there you can jump straight in. You can go again, A, and it even gives you, look, again, 2025, it gave you a little hint, look, A minus B. So here's A minus B. So net cash is going to be 5,200 minus 3,800, which will give us a figure of 1,400 there. 5,200 minus 3,450, 1,750. 5,650 minus 4,100, 1,550, and so on. And again, I can't say enough how much just practicing these style of questions, particularly again if you were to look down. So I'll finish off that question, but so 5,200 minus your expenditure 5,420 minus 220. Add up all your totals. You can do that as well. 5,200 plus 5,650, 21,250. 3,800 plus 3,450 plus 4,100 plus 5,420. 16,770. 21,250 minus 16,700 or 16,770 is 4,480. Right, then again, we've done our minusing. We're done with minusing now. Next step, net cash plus opening cash. So when you're doing your budget, the first thing you're going to do, first rule, opening cash, first month and total column. Second rule, define net cash, money in minus money out, whether that's a budget or a cash flow, same step. So it could be income minus expenditure, or it could be receipts minus payments. That's all the difference. Then you're finished with that, you're finished with minusing. In order to find closing cash, you add net cash plus opening cash. And once you do it the first time, rule number 4, your closing cash for the previous month becomes your opening cash for the next month. So in this case, 1,400 plus 600 is going to give us 2,000. Closing cash for January becomes my opening cash for February. Was there a question where some blanks were on the total expenditure? I think, to be honest, Hallie, they so the question we did at the start here, where is it? I think it was 2022. You could see there was blanks there where you had to kind of fill it in. So you can see ones there. So like you would have had to, the boxes, I know it's kind of messy. So these, for you to calculate that figure, that figure, and that figure there. So you had 4 figures, so there was some where there were blanks. Whereas in this question, and again, if I don't finish it off, you'll just have to follow all your steps. So 1,750 plus 2,000 is 3,750. Bring it up. 1,550 plus 3,750, 5,300. Sorry, what am I doing there? I'm skipping steps. Long day. 3,750, bring it up. Then we get 5,300 when we add them together. Bring it up here, minus 220 plus 5,300 gives us a figure of 5,080, and 4,480 plus 600 should give us a figure of 5,080, both matching, but which means we've done the question right. All wouldn't be possible if we didn't follow rule number 1, first month and total column. That's your most important thing, and that's where students mix up in terms of their balance. So try out the 2024 question. That's a good one to practice. And again, if you weren't working with me, try the 2023, 2022, and then even the sample paper 2019. Okay, so we have 2 minutes left there. Hopefully you took something. Budgets, cash flows, really every single year question comes up, as you can see. So 2019 sample, 22, 23, 24, 2025. So every year they've come up. Right, and there's your sample answer there, 796, 796. Postpone payment, seek appropriate credit, and so on. Payments, staggering the payments over a number of months. So we would have got our answer right there. Okay, so before the stream shuts off, any questions you have, I'll stick around in the chat for a couple of minutes after. Hopefully you took something from this. Really make sure you practice those other questions for me. And then we'll jump into kind of our question 17 next week, which is our ACB, again, going through questions, cash book and ledgers. So thank you for your time, and hopefully you took something. Okay, Manu, what I'll do is if the stream cuts off, I'll answer that in the chat for you. Okay? But other than that, if I'm not chatting to you in the chat, have a nice weekend, and I'll chat to you in the next one.